Others, when they reincarnate, either turn into a tiger or become a Tyrannosaurus rex. But I, upon reincarnation, became a glowing mushroom from the Cretaceous period. I could be stepped on and killed by any passing giant beast at any moment, just as I was preparing to accept this fleeting life. A drop of viscous, warm, dark red liquid, passing through many layers of obstruction, precisely dripped onto my damaged cap. The moment the scalding blood touched my cap, I initially thought I would be scorched by the intense heat. But suddenly, a burst of strange records erupted in my mind. High concentration, carbon-based bioenergy detected. Spore activity activated. I could clearly feel that. The parts covered by the blood were undergoing an incredible microscopic change, deep within the mycelial cushion, which originally only served to glow. A tiny spore, invisible to the naked eye, like a shark sensing the smell of blood, frantically burrowed into that drop of dinosaur blood. They were devouring the immense life force contained within that drop of blood. This force, following the connections of the spores, transformed into a torrent of wild, cold energy, violently pouring into my stipe. Broken hyphae beneath the soil regrew at a visible speed. My cap, which had been chipped away by flying stones, also began to grow transparent, flesh-bud-like growths intertwining to complete the repair. I was profoundly experiencing the changes within my body. As a former botany graduate student, I clearly understood that this defied the common biological knowledge of ordinary fungi. Conventional fungi decompose carrion through a lengthy fermentation process, but the spores I released were like a swarm of microscopic predators, directly assimilating energy at the cellular level. Once feeding was complete, that drop of fresh blood turned into a streak of grayish-white powder. Scattered by the breeze, my body size hadn't increased, but the faint blue glow became more profound. The toughness of my mycelia was more than twice what it was before. What if it were a living creature? A crazy thought sprouted in my mind, since I was at the top of the food chain, even though my size was less than an ant's. Then to survive in this world where I could be stepped on and killed at any moment, the only way out was to infiltrate upwards. I didn't need to grow into a towering tree. I just needed to be able to control those creatures at the top of the food chain. Suddenly, the ground vibrations returned, but this time, it wasn't the sound of heavy footsteps, but rather a fine, hurried scraping sound. The decaying leaves in front of me were pushed aside, and a creature over 20 centimeters long, entirely covered in dark brown armor, a prehistoric giant-shelled insect, a redwood insect, emerged from underground. The beetle's compound eyes rotated. Soon, it locked onto me, emitting a faint blue glow. In its simple neural circuits, this strange plant was a delicious, moisture-rich meal. The lotus-scented beetle pushed off with its 6 legs, like a miniature tank. Pushing aside the stones along its path, it opened its mandibles and directly bore down on me. I did not flinch. My cap was below. The blue light, which had dimmed after feeding, instantly surged to a dazzling intensity. An extremely fine, invisible to the naked eye, faint blue cloud of spores violently shot out from my gills, precisely plastered itself onto the giant beetle's wide-open mouthparts. There was no earth-shattering roar, only a shrill scream that seemed to pierce the microscopic world. That was the beetle's primitive nervous system, undergoing frenzied thrashing from a physical invasion. Its heavy black carapace, crashed to the ground less than half a centimeter from me. And now, the real battle had shifted to another battlefield. Beneath the beetle's thick chitinous exoskeleton, a fierce microscopic blitzkrieg was underway. My consciousness forcibly extended along the spore network. Inside the beetle's body, pale yellow hemolymph was surging wildly. Primitive phagocytes detected, the overwhelming foreign invaders, and swarmed to annihilate the faint blue spores. I unhesitatingly channeled all the high-grade carbon-based energy that I had just absorbed from the dinosaur blood. The command was issued: proliferate, fission, neural takeover. The spores that had infiltrated the beetle's body, infused with the immense energy, instantly underwent a terrifying morphological transformation. They were no longer floating particles, but sharply shot-out fungal fibers armed with barbs. Like countless miniature scalpels, they directly pierced through the phagocyte's encirclement and fiercely embedded themselves into the beetle's accessory nerve cord. On the surface, the prehistoric giant beetle, over 20 centimeters long, fell into a frenzy. Its 6 bristly limbs thrashed wildly in the mud, kicking up decaying leaves and gravel half a meter high. Its hard armor violently struck the surrounding tree roots, trying to shake off the intense pain within its body. In the depths of my consciousness, I roared silently, no longer relying on steady, gradual infiltration, but instead adopted a scorched earth tactic. All the infiltrating fungal fibers abandoned the assimilation of the beetle's internal organs, condensing into a faint blue ball of light. Following the nerve cord, it roughly burst open the beetle's pitifully small brain ganglion. The moment of contact, a massive torrent of wild, bloodthirsty, hungry, low-level biological instincts, like a mudslide, poured backward into my consciousness. I suppressed the nauseating feeling of my mind being polluted, using the vast mental barrier from my previous life as a human to forcibly sever and isolate this junk information. Then, the fungal fibers, like an opened net, firmly welded themselves to the beetle's motor control center. In the real world, the giant beetle, which had been thrashing wildly, suddenly stiffened, its pair of front limbs, raised high, froze in midair, twitching slightly, immediately after, from the crevices of its thick, dark brown carapace. A faint, almost imperceptible, faint blue glow seeped out. I slumped in the muddy puddle, the light on my cap so dim it was almost extinguished. This forced parasitism had drained all the hard-earned reserves I had managed to accumulate, but I had no time to rest. A strange dual perspective was forming in my mind. Vision was no longer a blurry 360-degree panorama. I felt as if I had opened a pair of incredibly complex eyes, countless hexagonal honeycomb. Grids were pieced together. I tried to rotate these new eyes, my gaze slowly moving with a massive, ferocious, black head. I saw towering fern root systems and tiny nematodes crawling in the soil. Then my gaze locked onto a spot a few centimeters ahead, where a nearly withered, pathetic blue glowing mushroom stood. A strange thrill arose in my heart. This experience of observing my own body from a third-person perspective broke all the common biological laws. I was now a monster with two bodies. One was the fragile core of my brain, and the other was the exoskeleton armor I had just seized. Move, I commanded. The beetle's left foreleg heavily stepped into the mud, followed by its right foreleg. Although its movements were mechanical and stiff, like a rusty marionette, it was indeed moving. It completely defied insect instinct, slowly turning around with an absolutely rational posture, facing my original body. It stopped above the glowing mushroom. The hair-thin mycelia of my original body slowly withdrew from the soil. The beetle lowered its head, pressing its mandibles flat against the ground. I commanded my original body to slowly climb onto the beetle's mandibles, climbing along its rough head carapace, finally firmly rooting itself at the junction of the two hardest bone plates on the beetle's back carapace. Here, the fungal fibers that had spread throughout the beetle's body quickly connected with my original body, establishing an energy channel. The blood circulating within the beetle, filtered by the spores, transformed into a continuous supply of nutrients, moisturizing my almost withered cap. From now on, you'll be called a Kaio. With my consciousness, I gently stroked the cold, hard simulated Kaio beneath me. Before I could fully experience the joy of this armored naval orange, a Kaio's two antennae on its head suddenly began to vibrate violently. That was an insect's keen sense of air currents, knowing something was approaching, and it was extremely fast. I quickly switched to a Kaio's secondary eye perspective. The dense thicket to the front left suddenly exploded open. A grayish-brown afterimage, accompanied by a foul, fishy gust of wind, rushed towards us. It was a prehistoric mammal, nearly half a meter long, an archosaur. It looked like a mutated rat, magnified dozens of times, using the force of its pounce. Its large mouth, filled with sharp teeth, bit directly towards Akaio's abdomen. I abruptly cut off Akaio's perception of pain. I controlled Akaio's heavy rear legs, stomping hard on the ground. Its front half reared up high like a wild horse. The archosaur's pounce missed, but that wasn't all. Due to inertia, the archosaur inevitably slid beneath Akaio's raised abdomen. My supercomputer-like brain, in 0.1 seconds, planned the most perfect attack route. Akaio's suspended upper body, with the gravitational acceleration of a fall from dozens of centimeters, slammed heavily onto the archosaur's soft spine below. At the same time, Akaio's internal, heavy hydraulic jaws aimed at the archosaur's undefended neck. A spine-chilling crack of bone echoed at the bottom of the silent ancient jungle. Exceptionally crisp, Akaio's massive jaws bit deeply and locked onto the archosaur's hide, its sharp serrated teeth directly severed. Its carotid artery and some organs. The archosaur let out a desperate, dying shriek. It thrashed its body wildly, trying to escape my grip. I squeezed every ounce of my willpower. My main body's mycelium even pierced through Akaio's back, directly coiling around its muscle fibers. Like the strings of a puppet, they pulled its limbs, firmly locking the closing muscles of Akaio's massive jaws, absolutely not allowing it to release its bite. With its last weak twitch, the archosaur completely became a gradually cooling corpse. I controlled Akaio, slowly releasing its somewhat deformed massive jaws. The originally inconspicuous azure orchid devil on its back was wantonly absorbing the bloody scent pervading the air. The fresh blood that had landed on the cap was being decomposed and devoured by the spores at a visible rate. Devoured. Detected fresh high-grade carbon-based energy source. Body damage rate 32%. Initiating absorption and repair program. I let out a long sigh of relief. Although I had no real lungs to breathe with, I still felt an extreme sense of exhilaration, like surviving a disaster. But this was far from enough. That archosaur just now was merely the most insignificant bottom-tier predator. In this vast Jurassic ecosystem, if even a single velociraptor came by, even if it just passed by a corner of our food, Akaio and I would still be crushed to pieces. I had to continue evolving. And quickly, I controlled Akaio, plunging its sharp forelimbs into the archosaur's flesh. The azure spores swarmed into the wound. This energy-rich corpse would become the cornerstone for building my first microscopic fortress, the cornerstone of the rampart. I raised Akaio's secondary eye, looking at the sky above, fragmented by the leaves. A decapod bird, with a wingspan of over 2 meters, was circling at the edge of the tree canopy, letting out a piercing, shrill cry. I didn't hesitate. Neural commands, like high-voltage electricity, surged through Akaio's motor center. The black prehistoric giant beetle suddenly shuddered, its massive jaws still firmly dragged. The Archosaur corpse, which was even larger than itself, plunging headfirst into the massive, crisscrossing roots of the ancient tree, sliding down into the root system. Less than half a second later, the light overhead suddenly dimmed. The decapod bird folded its wings, transforming into a gray meteorite, and dove down. The decapod bird's thick, scale-covered legs gripped fiercely where Akaio had been moments before. The attack missed. The decapod bird's keen vision pierced through the gaps in the roots, locking onto the dark brown beetle, struggling to drag the corpse in the shadows. Without hesitation, its sharp beak, like a rock drill, violently pecked down at Akaio's exposed rear half. The crisp sound of chitin cracking transmitted along the nerves. Akaio's chitinous plates at the base of its tail were forcefully pierced. The intense pain made Akaio instinctively want to release its prey and retaliate, but my ruthless will suppressed it, not allowing it to stop. Keep drilling deeper. Akaio, dragging its damaged tail, scrambled and crawled into the crevice between two ancient tree roots. As thick as coiled dragons, the space here was extremely narrow. The decapod bird's massive body got stuck outside. It furiously clawed and dug at the ground outside in frustration. Its sharp cries made my mycelial cap tremble. A few minutes later, the commotion outside finally subsided. After confirming it was safe, my taut nerves finally relaxed a little. Using Akaio's vision, I began to survey the surrounding environment. This was inside a fallen ancient giant tree. Long years and humid climate had long hollowed out the core of the trunk, forming a natural tunnel with a diameter of over half a meter. An excellent refuge. The hard outer wood could withstand the bites of most small to medium-sized predators, and the internal space was large enough for Akaio to move around. More importantly, this section of hollow, rotten wood, over 10 meters long, was itself a massive energy source, rich in organic matter. I would take root right here. I controlled Akaio, dragging the Archosaur's corpse deep into the rotten wood. Then, I slowly released. The fungal fibers coiled around Akaio's neural lock. The moment I detached from the armor, a wave of weakness swept over me. I slid off Akaio's back, firmly rooting myself into the humus at the bottom of the rotten wood. I urgently needed to replenish biomass. My root-like, originally slender white mycelial threads, now driven by the instinct for survival, burst forth with astonishing vitality. They were like countless greedy, translucent water snakes, one part deeply pierced into the rotten wood tissue below, frantically secreting highly efficient fungal enzymes, breaking down the tough lignin into basic carbohydrates. The other part directly coiled around the Archosaur's corpse, penetrating deep through the open wounds, devouring blood, internal organs, and muscles on a microscopic level. Energy, like a bursting flood, surged into my cap. Its original height of 10 centimeters was forcefully raised to 15 centimeters. Even more astonishing changes occurred. With the massive underground nutritional support, my mycelial network began exponential expansion. In less than 2 hours, the intricate azure mycelium had already spread like a neural network, covering nearly half the area. At the bottom of this section of rotten wood, this feeling was incredible. I was no longer a solitary individual, liable to be crushed at any moment. Wherever the mycelium spread, that was my body. That was my territory. I allocated a portion of my processing power, controlling the mycelium, to spread towards the two entrances and exits of the rotten wood. About half a meter inside the openings, I rapidly grew a large patch of dense, accessory villi with weak paralyzing toxins. These were the simplest biological sensors. Any creature that touched them would immediately transmit a signal to the central hub. After all this was done, I turned my attention to Akaio. Lying on its side, barely alive, the tail of this heavily armored machine was still leaking fluid. Its legs dangled limply. If it wasn't repaired, it wouldn't survive the night. Symbiosis meant a binding of interest. I unhesitatingly mobilized the energy I had just absorbed, 10 units of high-grade carbon-based energy from the beast. Following the mycelial network on the ground, I directly injected it into Akaio's body. This was no longer a brutal neural takeover, but a gentle tissue repair. A faint blue light enveloped Akaio. Its damaged pseudo-carapace, fungal spores mixed with Akaio's own bodily fluids, quickly coagulated and hardened at the wound site, forming a dark blue bio-patch with a unique texture. This patch was even harder than Akaio's original pseudo-carapace. Just as I was immersed in the joy of building my territory, the light outside dimmed. The Jurassic night had fallen. The temperature plummeted. The symphony of slaughter in the jungle officially began. The roars of ancient beasts, one after another, echoed through the empty valley. I retracted the bioluminescence on my umbrella-like tendrils, plunging the tree hollow into absolute darkness. In silence, time passed minute by minute. Suddenly, the mycelial sensor, guarding the right edge of the cave entrance, registered a sharp pain. Something had entered, and it was not small. I immediately took over Akaio's vision. Through the beetle's weak night vision, I saw a familiar, hunched, grayish-brown silhouette. It was cautiously poking its head into the almost narrow entrance of the tree hollow. It was the 10-footed bird from earlier today. This persistent predator, relying on its abnormal sense of smell, had waited until nightfall, following the lingering scent of the 10-unit beast carcass, and found its mark. Truly a persistent ghost. My thoughts turned ice-cold. During the day, outside, the open terrain was the 10-footed bird's absolute domain. But now, it dared to stick its head into my meticulously crafted, enclosed fortress. This was practically an easy target delivered to my doorstep. The 10-footed bird let out a low hiss. Half of its body had already squeezed into the tree hollow. The narrow space restricted the movement of its wings, but its sharp, converging claws were still deadly. It saw the lifeless black beetle lying on the ground, and the half-eaten carcass of the primeval beast. Greed overcame caution. It opened its mouth, ready to move forward and enjoy this lavish dinner. The command to lock the cave entrance was given to Akayo. Akayo, which had been playing dead on the ground, suddenly lifted its 6 severed limbs and clamped them tightly onto the decaying wood's inner wall. Its massive insect body, like a black shield, directly blocked the 10-footed bird. The 10-footed bird was startled by this sudden change, and then immediately flew into a rage. It let out a sinister cackle, and its beak, swift as lightning, struck towards Akayo's mouth. With a dull thud, Akayo did not dodge, allowing the blow to strike its hardest head carapace. It forcefully withstood the 10-footed bird's impact. Taking advantage of this pause, I unleashed my true killing move. My main body's cap instantly swelled up. A faint blue light pulsed in the darkness. The highly concentrated, mutated spores, accumulated for a long time, did not spread outwards, but instead, following the crisscrossing mycelial network underground, at an astonishing speed, were delivered to the surface of the decaying wood, beneath the 10-footed bird's feet. Just as the 10-footed bird lifted its claw, preparing for a second attack on Akayo, the wood chips beneath its feet suddenly exploded. A dense, almost liquid, faint blue spore substance, like a high-pressure water gun, accurately sprayed onto the 10-footed bird's abdomen and open mouth and nostrils. These were the highly concentrated neuro-paralyzing spores I had extracted using the 10-unit beast carcass. Inside the enclosed tree hollow, these spores had nowhere to dissipate. The moment the 10-footed bird inhaled the spores, its shrill scream abruptly ceased. Its eyes bulged suddenly, pupils rapidly contracting. Tiny fungal spores penetrated deep into its respiratory tract, instantly covering the surface of its alveoli, blocking oxygen exchange. At the same time, the paralyzing toxins rushed through its bloodstream directly to its brain. Oxygen deprivation and suffocation. Neural blockage. 1 second, a ferociously brutal prehistoric raptor. The next second, it became a headless fly. It frantically thrashed and rolled in the narrow tree hollow, emitting dull thudding sounds. It tried to retreat from the tree hollow, but Akayo's steel-like body firmly blocked its escape route. Its sharp mandibles were even more brutal, clamping down on one of the 10-footed bird's feet. I coldly watched all of this. The underground mycelium, like a pack of wolves sensing blood, burst through the soil and, following the wounds created by the 10-footed bird's thrashing, relentlessly burrowed into its flesh. The intensity of its struggles diminished. 5 minutes later, the 10-footed bird stopped convulsing. The tree hollow once again fell silent. A half-meter-long 10-footed bird carcass lay quietly, less than a meter from my main body. Countless blue mycelial threads, like a delicate net, I had already completely enveloped it, beginning a new round of brutal digestion. Detected high-grade composite carbon-based energy. Detected vertebrate motor neural chain template. Territory energy reserve soared. I clearly felt a surging vitality, 10 times stronger than before, coursing through my body. My mycelium penetrated the bottom layer of the decaying wood, reaching deeper underground water veins. This ancient tomb fortress completely spilled out from within the dark, hollow giant tomb. Since the strangulation of the 10-footed bird, 3 days and nights had passed. The original half-meter-long raptor carcass was now just a grayish-white skeleton, like a broken piece of art, embedded in the dark humus soil. Countless blood-red threads entwined the surface of the skeleton, along with delicate faint blue mycelium, currently draining the last trace of calcium and phosphate from deep within the bone marrow. My main body had undergone its first substantial transformation since rebirth. The cap, originally the size of a coin, had now expanded to the breadth of a dinner plate. Its underside was no longer a fragile, translucent membrane, but had grown a dense, metallic-sheened keratinous layer. The tendrils hanging from its edges had grown thicker, like jellyfish stingers, slowly swaying in the air, capturing every chemical message carried by the slightest breeze. The biggest change occurred underground. With a massive nutrient supply, my mycelial kingdom had completely taken over. This section of decaying wood, over 10 meters long, its perception was no longer limited to the main body's vicinity. Wherever the mycelium spread, into the wood grain crevices, and even the soil layer outside the decaying wood, all became extensions of my nerve endings. I could even clearly see a blind ancient earthworm trying to approach my root system. Immediately, a needle-tip-sized mycelial thread pierced its nerve ganglion, instantly draining its bodily fluids. This sense of control could easily lead one astray, but the rationality of a former botany graduate student firmly suppressed the burgeoning desire. This was the Jurassic period. In front of true behemoths, my microscopic fortress, spanning over 10 meters, was still just decaying wood that could be crushed with a single stomp. A coyote quietly submitted in the shadow of the cave entrance, after absorbing the 10-footed bird's high-grade carbon-based energy. This prehistoric giant beetle's physique had undergone a bizarre mutation. The surface of its originally blackish-brown carapace had developed faint blue patterns. Like cast iron pillars, the thickness of its dorsal carapace had doubled. Its pair of mandibles had reached a terrifying level of biting force. Peace is always fleeting. Through the vibration feedback from the underground mycelium, I was abruptly awakened from my dormancy. The source of the tremor was 20 meters from the decaying wood's periphery. My thoughts immediately began to rapidly decode vibrational waveforms. Bipedal landing. Their weight was approximately 30 kilograms. Their steps were agile, with a clear team formation. Most crucially, when they walked, one toe was deliberately curled upwards, not touching the ground. Sickle-clawed small predators of the Chilong suborder, the most notorious killers in the jungle. 5 gray-green afterimages darted out from the tall, peculiar shrubs silently surrounding this section of hollow rotten wood. Using the peripheral mycelial surveillance, I clearly saw this group of uninvited guests. They came following the scent. Although the Xianxia corpse had already been digested, the trace amount of amino acid scent remaining in the still couldn't escape the noses of these top-tier hounds. The leading female dragon moved steadily. It had a ghastly pale scar running to the corner of its eye. The scarred alpha wolf lowered its body, emitting a gurgling, low growl from its throat. The other 4 female dragons immediately fanned out, forming a semi-encircling formation, completely blocking all possible exits of the rotten wood. They did not rush in recklessly. The scarred alpha wolf tentatively extended its ancient snout into the narrow tree-hole entrance, forcefully twitching its nostrils. The next second, what greeted it were 2 pitch-black heavy scissors. A chow, who had been subdued for a long time, launched a fierce attack with its powerful mandibles, with a rush of wind that tore through the air, directly twisting towards the alpha wolf's neck. The scarred alpha wolf's reaction speed was incredible. At the last moment, it violently pulled back its head. A chow's mandibles narrowly grazed its snout, shaving off a piece of bloody cartilage. The alpha wolf let out a sharp hiss and leaped back abruptly, but it was not scared. Instead, the fierce light in its eyes grew more intense. The alpha wolf issued a command for a full assault. 2 slightly smaller toothed dragons leaped directly onto the top of the rotten wood. Their sharp sickle claws frantically dug at the already decaying wooden shell. The other 2, cooperating with the alpha wolf, continuously moved around the entrance of the tree hole, attempting to lure a chow out from its defensive position. I coldly observed all of this, facing 5 incredibly agile toothed dragons. I couldn't fight them head-on. I could only outsmart them. I decisively changed my strategy. The neural command for a chow to retreat was issued. A chow showed no hesitation, releasing its appendages that were gripping the edge of the hole. Its massive body slowly retreated backward, retreating all the way into the deepest part of the tree hole. A dark opening appeared in front of my main body. A passage emanating a strange, faint fragrance was unreservedly displayed before the group of toothed dragons. The digging sounds outside the entrance abruptly ceased. 5 toothed dragons gathered at the entrance. Their cunning instincts made them hesitate slightly when facing the undefended entrance. A trace of hesitation arose, but deep within the tree hole, the alluring scent of high-grade biomass was continuously stimulating their hunger. The alpha wolf's slender tail flicked twice. It decided to personally scout. Lowering its body, the alpha wolf, like a cunning, venomous snake, slowly crawled into the tree hole. The other 3 followed closely, leaving only one to stand guard at the entrance, just as they had penetrated about 5 meters into the tree hole. With their retreat paths restricted by the narrow space, the roles of hunter and prey instantly and dramatically reversed. All converged on my consciousness. Deeply and coldly issued the execution order. The originally flat, rotten ground suddenly came alive. The soil beneath the toothed dragon's feet collapsed without warning. In the instant before they could even jump, a layer, buried just half a centimeter beneath the surface, of countless resilient mycelial strands, woven into a dark blue net, violently contracted like a mousetrap spring. The tough mycelial strands instantly entangled the ankles of the 4 female dragons. These mycelial strands, which had absorbed the essence of raptor bones, were as tough as Kevlar fibers. The more they struggled, the tighter they constricted. The sudden, intense pain plunged the group of toothed dragons into chaos. Sharp screams erupted within the confined tree hole, but the physical restraint was merely an appetizer. At the exact moment the net tightened, the seemingly harmless green moss on the inner walls of the tree hole suddenly ruptured collectively. The sound of high-pressure airflow erupting rang out. A dense, visible to the naked eye. Strangely purplish red spore cloud shot out from all directions, instantly engulfing the four trapped toothed dragons. This was something I had spent 2 full days, extracting the Xianxia cerebrospinal fluid template, fusing it with my own toxins, and specially concocting the neural replacement spores. It didn't need to be transmitted through blood, as long as it came into contact with the respiratory tract, mucous membranes, or even the surface of the eyeballs. The toxin would reach the brain's nerve center within 3 seconds. The alpha wolf, at the center of the spore cloud, was the first to suffer severe damage. It was frantically using its sharp teeth to bite at the mycelial strands wrapped around its feet. It inhaled a large mouthful of the purplish-red mist. In an instant, the alpha wolf's pupils dilated violently. Its entire sclera became bloodshot, turning a terrifying crimson. Its world was completely distorted under the destructive effects of the replacement toxin. The narrow tree hole before its eyes vanished. In its place was a blood-red killing field, and its companions, struggling and rubbing against each other beside it. In its visual signals, all transformed into creatures with gaping bloody maws, deadly enemies trying to snatch its food. The alpha wolf let out the most ferocious roar of its life. It abandoned biting and tearing at the mycelial strands on the ground. It violently twisted its head, its sharp snout directly biting the neck of another female dragon beside it. Blood splattered onto the faintly glowing inner walls of the rotten wood. The bitten female dragon had also inhaled the replacement spores. Its ferocity greatly increased. It didn't care that the one biting it was its alpha. Its deadly sickle claw sprang up violently, with desperate brute force, fiercely stabbing into the alpha wolf's soft abdomen, and savagely tearing downwards. I quietly rooted myself at the end of the tree hole, coldly watching this cruel drama of mutual slaughter. The 4 terrifying jungle killers had now become out-of-control meat grinders. They bit and tore at each other, using their sickle claws to disembowel. The narrow space became a perfect death arena, but the toothed dragon's vitality far exceeded Lin Yu's expectations. The alpha wolf, its abdomen completely ripped open, relying on its abnormal physical constitution and the adrenaline surge brought by the replacement toxin, actually managed to bite off the heads of 2 of its companions. Its crimson eyes pierced through the purplish-red spore cloud and fixedly locked onto the darkness deep within. That calm dark blue mushroom, the neurotoxic destruction, had reached its final stage. The alpha wolf's consciousness, however, experienced a moment of clarity for 1 second. It realized that the blue glowing thing was the source of this entire hellish scene. The alpha wolf squeezed out the last bit of potential from its life. It actually managed to forcefully tear off one of its hind legs, which had been tightly entangled by the mycelial strands. With its maimed body, it charged directly at my main body. The distance was too close. The speed was too fast. Xiao, who had been guarding in front, violently lunged into the air, attempting to intercept, but the heavily wounded and frenzied alpha wolf completely ignored Xiao's impact, allowing the beetle's horn to pierce its chest. Using the momentum, its snout's distance from Lin Yu's cap was less than 10 centimeters. Its foul, fishy breath had even bent the tendrils on Lin Yu's edge. There was no avoiding it. Lin Yu had no intention of avoiding it. In this 0.1 second of life and death, the center of my cap suddenly split open with a tiny crack. All the dark blue luminescence extinguished at this moment. All energy was extremely compressed, converging into a high-pressure acid needle. A black spike, made of high-concentration corrosive extract and super-hardened mycelial filaments, like a sniper rifle bullet exiting a barrel, shot out from the crack in the cap. This tiny spike precisely and accurately pierced the alpha wolf's wide-open mouth, unhindered, piercing through its vulnerable forehead. The alpha wolf's fierce gaze instantly dissipated. Its massive body heavily crashed onto the soil. Its huge sickle claws slid forward due to inertia. A deathly silence once again enveloped the tree hole, the female dragon standing guard outside the entrance, listening to the bone-chilling tearing and biting sounds from within. And the final, chilling silence that followed, it tucked its tail and frantically darted into the jungle, disappearing without a trace. I re-illuminated the blue light on my umbrella-like cap. The subterranean Eulalia mycelia surged upwards like a tide, piercing the tough skin of the Qilong, burrowing into its blood vessels, muscles, and bones. This fresh, highly energy-dense body will become the most monumental fuel on my path of evolution. But I wasn't blinded by victory. This battle was won by sheer luck. If the Qilong outside had desperately torn down the giant screen, if the alpha wolf hadn't inhaled enough poisonous spores, I would have been trampled into a pulp by now. The surface is too dangerous. This is the hunting ground of Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, and countless terrifying predators. In this two-dimensional plane, no matter how strong I build my fortress, sooner or later, it will be flattened by a single stomp from those monsters weighing over a dozen tons. Controlling a Kaio, I walked to the edge of the tree hollow, raised my head, and through the beetle's covering, looked up at those towering, cloud-piercing, 100-meter-tall ancient giant yew trees, and gymnosperms. The intertwined, sky-obscuring tree canopy formed an aerial world, completely different from the ground. To survive, I must escape the two-dimensional meat grinder. In my mind, I drew up the strategic blueprint for the next phase. I will use the mycelia as a bridge, the tree trunks as stairs, and extend my territory towards the sky. I want to build on those hundreds of meters high tree crowns to establish a fungal corridor that no surface predator can reach. The process of digesting the four-limbed chilong was a microscopic feast. Deep underground, my Eulalia mycelia king was engaged in a frantic biomass plunder. Vast amounts of energy, following the intricate underground network, continuously converged into my main body. My cognitive processing power, with the influx of energy, experienced explosive growth. I didn't use all this energy to strengthen my main body's defenses. My postgraduate mindset from my previous life made me understand that a fixed fortress is ultimately a sitting duck. I needed to establish an automated defensive position. Through the underground mycelial control, my attention focused on a patch of shrubs, about 3 meters outside the rotten wood entrance. There grew several Jurassic, specific prehistoric carnivorous plants. The main body was a dark red sac, covered with fleshy spines, its white edges dripping with viscous digestive fluid, specifically designed to trap passing large insects. I branched out hundreds of reinforced Eulalia mycelia, like venomous snakes moving underground, silently coiling around the roots of the strongest carnivorous plant among them, forcibly parasitizing it. Neural transmission between plants is much slower than in animals. This prehistoric Venus flytrap offered almost no resistance before being completely taken over by my spores. Next, its vascular system was modified. I extracted potent paralyzing toxins from the chilong's body, mixed them with fragments of Akaio's shed chitin, and continuously injected them along the mycelia into the plant sac. The dark red sac, visible to the naked eye, began to violently swell and mutate. The originally soft fleshy spines, bolstered by the chitin, hardened into 3-centimeter-long black spikes. The muscle fibers at the base of the sac were rewoven by the infusion, forming a structure similar to a high-pressure air gun. In just half a day, a miniature bio-machine gun turret was formed. As long as I give the command, the high-pressure air gun will instantly contract, launching the black spikes, full of chilong toxin, outwards. Its codename is J. I looked at my masterpiece, and a hint of cold satisfaction arose from deep within me. With Akaio as heavy melee armor, and J as remote control, this section of hollow, rotten wood could finally be considered a true defensive position. I was about to continue manipulating the mycelia, to climb up the giant tree, to execute the sky corridor plan, when a dull tremor suddenly came from the surface. This wasn't the light footsteps of a predator, but the sound of something extremely heavy, weighing many tons. Hitting the ground, I immediately cut off the upward climb and instantly redirected all my senses back to the ground. Less than 10 meters from the rotten wood, a green wall formed by tall shrubs was forcibly smashed apart. An enormous creature, covered in mud and residual leaves, heavily crashed onto the open ground at the edge of my territory. I clearly saw the newcomer's full appearance. It was an underage Triceratops. Although it was said to be underage, its body length still approached 3 meters. For me, who was currently only the size of a dinner plate, this was still an insurmountable mountain of flesh. But this young Triceratops was in a terrible state at this moment. Its proud frill had a huge gap torn in it, revealing pale bone plates. Its long left horn was broken off at the base. Its thick limbs trembled violently. With every breath, white mist mixed with blood foam sprayed from its nostrils. It was fleeing for its life, and the hunters chasing it were certainly not to be trifled with. At the gap in the bushes where the young Triceratops fell, 2 agile and cruel shadows slowly emerged. They were 2 Dacateraptors, over 5 meters long. The 2 raptors, one on the left and one on the right, formed a perfect pincer attack formation. The young Triceratops struggled to stand up, but the intense pain from its broken leg and blood loss caused it to collapse again, right after propping up its forelimbs. Where it fell, its back heavily hit the hollow rotten wood where I resided. The dry bark on the outer layer of the rotten wood was peeled off in large chunks by this immense impact. The entire interior of the tree hollow shook violently. My main body suddenly contracted. The internal structure of the rotten wood was already somewhat rotten. It definitely couldn't withstand the repeated crushing of this 1.5-ton object. If this young Triceratops died here, those 2 Dacateraptors' subsequent feasting frenzy would surely stomp this piece of wood, along with my main body, into fragments. Standing by idly was waiting for death. I quickly assessed the enemies and my own capabilities. Although Akaio's carapace was hard, its size was only a little over 20. For it to bite a 5-meter-long Dacateraptor was tantamount to suicide. The poisonous spikes, though deadly, were limited in number, facing 2 top predators with extremely high agility. If one strike missed, the position would be completely exposed. I could only use their strength against them. My absolutely rational mind instantly made a decision. I had to save this young Triceratops, or rather, turn it into my next war machine. The young Triceratops leaned desperately against the rotten wood, staring at the approaching Dacateraptors, letting out a mournful cry from its throat. Suddenly, the young Triceratops felt something emerge from the rotten wood. It was leaning against 1, 2, hundreds of glowing blue threads, like living things, penetrated the cracks in the rotten wood. Along the rough, angular crevices on its back. They silently spread upwards. It instinctively wanted to struggle, but the weakness caused by blood loss left it without the strength to even shake its body. The next second, those glowing blue mycelia accurately found its large wound on its back. Torn by the raptors, without hesitation, they directly pierced it. The young Triceratops let out a short cry of alarm. It thought it was attacked by some poisonous insect, but then it froze. There was no pain, as those glowing threads pierced its blood, nerves, and muscle tissues. An unprecedented, strange sensation of coolness extinguished the burning agony at the wound. Within his microscopic body, the spore army was performing a frantic emergency surgery. A large amount of carbon-based energy was delivered to the little Triceratops's wound. Mycelial threads intertwined, forcibly pulling the most precise sutures, closing the broken muscle fibers. Those spores containing replacement toxins were now precisely regulated in concentration by me, transforming into the most effective cardiotonic and adrenaline, directly injected into the Triceratops' spinal cord. The host's neural link established pain shielding. The muscle pump blood frequency was forcibly stretched to 80%. My consciousness, following the mycelial network, forcefully squeezed into the simple mind of the little Triceratops. It seemed a silent, yet absolutely micro-pressurized command, exploded in the little Triceratops's subconscious. The little Triceratops's previously unfocused pupils suddenly constricted. He felt a strange, violent power continuously surged from his back into all his limbs and bones. He didn't know what that glowing thing on his back was, but his biological instinct for survival told him this was his only chance to live. The little Triceratops's stout forelegs fiercely stomped into the mud. His body, weighing 1.5 tons, miraculously stood up again. Not only that, with the integration of a large number of spores, the previously grayish-brown phosphatic scales on his body's surface faintly revealed a layer of ethereal blue. Net-like patterns, the two Dakota raptors opposite stopped in their tracks. In their yellowish-brown, tree-trunk-like eyes, a flicker of phosphorescence passed. The doubt lasted only half a second. Hunger and the instinct to kill once again took over. The raptor on the left let out a short, urgent hiss. It's too long. Powerful hind legs suddenly pushed off the ground. Its massive body transformed into a grayish-black lightning bolt, leaping directly over 2 meters high. It opened its powerful jaws filled with teeth, aiming directly for the Triceratops's carotid artery. Head down. Turn 15 degrees to the right. My command, via bioelectrical signals, was directly transmitted at a speed exceeding the reflex arc to the Triceratops's motor nerves. Almost at the same instant, the raptor leaped. The little Triceratops's heavy head suddenly jolted, its body to the right, performing an extremely counterintuitive dodge. The raptor grazed the edge of the Triceratops's neck, kicking up a string of dazzling sparks. The attack missed. Due to inertia, the raptor's massive body inevitably fell into the empty space on the Triceratops's right, and that was precisely the attack zone of what had been lying in wait. Fire, I commanded coldly, in the depths of my consciousness, issuing the execution order. From within, the modified prehistoric carnivorous plant suddenly contracted violently. The high-pressure air gun erupted with a muffled, unusual sound. 3 black spikes, fully imbued with potent neurotoxin, instantly pierced through the lingering leaves in midair. The raptor, having just landed, had no time to make any evasive movements. 2 spikes savagely plunged into its soft abdomen. The third directly pierced through the muscle of its right thigh. In just 2 seconds, this 5-meter-long beast began to convulse violently in all its limbs. Large amounts of white foam spewed from its mouth. Its massive body crashed to the ground. The other raptor, which had been preparing to follow up and flank, seeing this, abruptly halted its advance. It cautiously surveyed the surrounding monsters, and then looked at the little Triceratops, whose entire body glowed with an eerie blue light. It recoiled. This raptor let out a threatening low growl, slowly backing away. Then, with a turn, it quickly disappeared into the depths of the dense fern forest. There was no more movement. Danger averted. The little Triceratops's taut nerves suddenly relaxed. I immediately withdrew the forcibly injected biopumped blood. Frequency, without the support of the overworking adrenaline. The little Triceratops's massive body, with a rumble, like a pile of mud, once again collapsed beside the rotting wood. But this time, he did not feel the despair of a frozen death. The ethereal blue mycelial threads on his back had not withdrawn. Instead, they gently spread out like a giant biological net, completely covering his wounds. The spores were, at an astonishing speed, helping him repair damaged blood vessels and muscle tissue. My main body quietly lay hidden in the depths of the tree hollow. That combination of attacks just now almost completely drained all the high-level energy I had accumulated during this period, but I felt this transaction was extremely worthwhile. A Cairo crawled out from the edge of the tree hollow, following the path laid by the mycelial network, slowly crawled onto the tip of the little Triceratops's nose. The little Triceratops laboriously opened its eyes, looking at this blackish-brown beetle perched on its nose. It then turned its head and glanced at the section of rotting wood behind it. which emitted a soft blue light. With its not-so-high intelligence, it couldn't understand symbiosis, such a complex biological concept. It only knew that this blue light and this insect had snatched him back from the jaws of death. That warm sensation connected to its nerves made the little Triceratops, who had lost its herd, feel a long-lost sense of security. It exhaled a warm, rough breath from its nostrils, making Akairo sway. Then, it obediently closed its eyes, allowing the mycelial threads to move freely within its body. Repair contract confirmed. Large-scale ground combat platform successfully acquired. Through the mycelial network, sensed the little Triceratops's stabilized heartbeat. Having acquired such a heavy armored platform, I finally had the capital to directly confront the dangers on this perilous Jurassic continent and engage in direct confrontation. As long as the little Triceratops's injuries healed, I could even consider leaving this fixed section of rotting wood and initiating an era of mobile expansion. However, at this tranquil moment of recovery, a drop of icy liquid passed through the overlapping tree canopies and grass, precisely landing on the rotting wood's outer shell. My mycelial network suddenly jolted, looking up at the sky through Akaio's secondary eyes. Looked towards the sky. Unbeknownst to me, the previously sunny Cretaceous sky was now heavily covered by a thick layer of dark clouds, like iron and lead. Pressing down, the suffocating humidity in the air was rising at an extremely alarming rate. Raindrops began to fall densely. This was no ordinary thunderstorm. As a former botany graduate student, my perception of meteorology far surpassed that of ordinary people. The precipitous drop in atmospheric pressure and the sudden commotion and fleeing of various insects in the ancient jungle all conveyed a chilling signal. A prehistoric, super-heavy rainstorm, capable of altering topography and destroying the entire regional ecosystem, had arrived. When the first raindrop hit the dead wood, it didn't make a clear splashing sound, but a dull cracking sound. My underground mycelial network was frantically alarming at this moment. What I perceived was not wetness, but a suffocating sense of compression. The Jurassic raindrops were filled with terrifying kinetic energy. Each drop was grape-sized, continuously pounding the ground, instantly transforming this fern-covered valley into a pot of boiling mud. The sky had completely darkened. The clouds were so low they seemed to be pressing directly on the crowns of the 100-meter-tall gymnosperm trees. Fierce winds howled, causing tree trunks as thick as several people embracing them to emit an excruciating creaking sound as they bent. The water level was rising too fast. My thoughts raced in the cold light of the lightning. Through the peripheral mycelial threads, I clearly saw the usually docile forest stream had now turned into a roaring yellow torrent. A massive flood, mixed with gravel, broken branches, and the corpses of unknown small dinosaurs, was sweeping through the valley with devastating force. This hollow section of rotting wood, over 10 meters long, beneath my feet, which had once been an impregnable fortress, had now become a deadly coffin. The decaying wood simply could not withstand the muddy water's rapid immersion. The internal structure of the sack began to tighten over a large area. The pulling force transmitted by my younger brother grew stronger and stronger. That was a premonition of decaying wood about to be uprooted, a precursor to being swept into the flood. I cannot stay here and wait for death. I suppressed my attachment to the vast territory. Akaio's superior neural command was issued. The prehistoric beetle, subdued at the tree hollow's entrance, without any hesitation, braving the torrential rain, its 6 stump-like limbs gripping the muddy ground tightly. In a few steps, climbed onto the small Triceratops nearby's broad back. Finally, it settled in the safest depression beneath its defensive frill. The small Triceratops was currently running restlessly. This terrestrial herbivore, with its massive tonnage, naturally harbored an extreme fear of water currents. The torrential rain poured down on its scarred scales. If it weren't for my Bayazi inside its body, forcibly calming its central nervous system, it would have long since run wild like a mad beast. Sever the link. In the depths of my consciousness, I issued the most cruel command to myself. No anesthetic. No buffer. I forcibly propelled my main body. The umbrella-like apex tentacles contracted sharply, drawing all the core biomass back upwards. Immediately after, accompanied by a violent tremor, like a soul tearing apart, it forcibly tore off everything below the surface, all its crisscrossing root systems. The faint blue light instantly dimmed. The few remaining main tentacles, like barbs, pierced into the gaps between the small Triceratops' tail scales and climbed upwards along its spine, just as I was about to climb onto the Triceratops' defensive frill. From the surrounding swamp, a faint bioelectrical wave was transmitted. Trembling, it was Gina, the prehistoric carnivorous plant I had forcibly modified, now being uprooted by the surging muddy water, struggling desperately at the edge of the torrent, instinctively sending distress signals to its mother body. Leave it behind, my reason told me. Taking along a plant with no mobility now would be a burden, but my past life's scientific obsession and realities' protective instinct made me instantly make another crazy decision. Lower your head. I forcibly controlled the small Triceratops through my neural network, making it lower its huge, heavy head close to the muddy ground. My main body suddenly sprang from the Triceratops' defensive frill, shooting out several thick tentacles tightly wrapped around Gina's roots, which were about to be swept away. Using the force of the Triceratops raising its head, I pulled this mutated plant, weighing over 10 kgs, out of the mud. The subsequent operation could be called a biological atrocity. The horn on the small Triceratops' left side had been broken off at its base in a previous battle, leaving only a bowl-sized opening. A pale, bony structure still oozing bloody water. That was its most vulnerable and fatal wound. Controlling my tentacles, I directly inserted Gina's mud-covered, wild root system into the small Triceratops, drilling into flesh and blood without aid. The small Triceratops let out a heart-wrenching shriek. Its massive body swayed wildly, trying to shake off the strange thing on its head. Be quiet. I instantly unleashed all my remaining high-level energy. The faint blue bayazi, like solidified plasma, surged madly into the wound where the horn had broken off. These bayazi acted as the perfect biological welding rods, forcibly binding Gina's plant vascular bundles with the small Triceratops' arteries, blood vessels, and facial nerves, fusing them tightly together. A miraculous fusion, the memories that were almost withering away. After coming into contact with the Triceratops' scorching starhead cavity, instantly burst forth with terrifying vitality. Life bloomed from the broken horn. A living, biochemical venom-spitting turret, directly controlled by nerves, grew on the forehead of this ancient giant beast, without giving the rain-soaked creature time to breathe. The hollow, decaying wood behind them finally let out a desperate wail, and was completely shattered by a flood crest over 2 meters high. Huge chunks of wood, mixed with mud and sand, crashed down like an overwhelming tide towards the Triceratops. My consciousness fully took over the Triceratops' movements. The small Triceratops' limb muscles suddenly surged, 0.1 seconds before the flood crest hit. Covered in mud, it desperately rushed into the depths of the rain-battered jungle. It was a directionless escape. The slightly lower basins were already completely swallowed by the yellowish-brown floodwaters. I could only rely on a rough understanding of the terrain's guidance to control the Triceratops, desperately galloping towards a higher mountain ridge. The scene along the way was like purgatory. In the face of natural disaster, all attempts at life's struggle seemed laughable. After galloping for over 10 minutes, the Triceratops' steps began to falter. The water level had already submerged its thick lower legs. Its resistance began to gradually awaken, attempting to regain control of its body. Stop. Don't stop. If you stop, you'll be swept away. In its central nervous system, I engaged in a desperate struggle with the Triceratops' instincts, constantly releasing trace amounts of debilitating toxins, stimulating its cerebral cortex, forcing it to continue wading forward. Suddenly, in the red water to the Triceratops' right, an abnormal dark red ripple appeared. That kind of water flow, the unique sensation of resistance from a massive creature breaking through the water, was precisely transmitted to me along the ripples, into my neural net. Something is underwater. Its size is immense. Its speed is extremely fast, and it carries an undisguised aura of menace. Turn right 30 degrees. Defensive stance. My command had just been issued. The water surface to the Triceratops' right exploded with a roar. A gaping maw, reeking of blood and stench, bit directly at the Triceratops' right foreleg. It was a prehistoric giant amphibious predator, an ancient relative of Purosaurus, a deepwater demon over 7 meters long. The giant crocodile's upper and lower jaws clamped down fiercely, tearing open the thick armor on the side of the Triceratops' foreleg, ripping off a large chunk of flesh and skin. Oozing dark red blood, the Triceratops let out a painful roar. Its massive body in the muddy water swayed violently, almost losing balance and falling. Having succeeded in one strike, the giant crocodile did not press the attack. Its huge tail violently thrashed the water, its massive body once again disappearing into the murky floodwaters, preparing to launch a second fatal death roll. Fighting a war of attrition with an alligator in the water was suicide. What was worse, the fresh blood flowing from the Triceratops' wound would soon attract more underwater predators. Akaio, I coldly issued the command. The giant beetle, which had been subdued behind the Triceratops' defensive frill, suddenly sprang up. It did not enter the water, but instead climbed along the Triceratops' rough skin, all the way up to the tip of its intact right horn. At the very top, Akaio straightened its 2 antennae, acting as a high-frequency bioradar. I closed my eyes, concentrating all my senses on Akaio's antennae, capturing the extremely subtle air currents and scent changes. On the water's surface, I suddenly opened my illusory eyes. Constructed of energy, the controlled Triceratops, disregarding everything, turned its heavy, ferocious head, aiming the mutated broken horn on its left side, which was now Gina, directly at the seemingly calm murky water. To its rear right, beneath the surface, a massive shadow was rapidly rising. The giant crocodile's cold yellow eyes stared at the Triceratops' vulnerable underbelly. Preparing to launch its true death roll, it opened its massive mouth. Fire, I roared in the depths of my consciousness. Gina, parasitizing the Triceratops' skull. Its dark red sac instantly swelled to its limit. The high-pressure air gun let out an extremely muffled bang. This time, it no longer shot out a single spike, but a total of 5 black spikes filled with high-concentration neurotoxin. The distance was too close. The giant crocodile's massive body had nowhere to hide in the water. Two spikes pierced through its rough back, one plunged into its neck, and the most fatal one, precisely from above its wide-open mouth, pierced directly through its upper jaw, embedding itself in that pitifully small reptilian brain. The water surface instantly exploded with a huge splash. The giant crocodile let out a tragic roar. Lethal toxins destroyed its nervous system in a fraction of a second. Its massive body in the water began to roll wildly and illogically. I didn't give it any chance to breathe. I stepped over, forcibly squeezing out of the little triceratops' body. The last bit of adrenaline, the 3-ton beast let out an angry roar. Its thick forelimbs lifted high, stomping fiercely on the still thrashing giant crocodile. The giant crocodile stopped convulsing, turning into a mangled corpse floating downstream. The crisis was resolved, but the real disaster had just begun. The giant crocodile's frantic thrashing before death disrupted the balance of the undercurrents in this small body of water. A huge whirlpool, formed by the convergence of two torrents, suddenly opened up beneath the triceratops. The mud and sand at the bottom of the water were completely hollowed out. The triceratops slipped, letting out a terrified cry. Its massive body was swept into the bottomless torrent. My main body clung tightly to its back, all the tentacles on the umbrella straps pierced into its flesh to secure my position. Hold your breath. Relax your muscles. Follow the current. I desperately issued commands to the triceratops below, trying to stabilize its body, which was stiff with extreme panic. My vision was completely deprived. I didn't know how long I had been tumbling underwater. Minutes or hours. I could feel that the little triceratops' heartbeat was growing weaker, and the energy I had injected through my strategist was also about to run out. Just as I thought, this newly assembled armored squad was about to be completely wiped out. The current ahead suddenly became smooth. The triceratops' massive head finally broke the surface of the water. It greedily gulped in air. I used the occasional flashes of lightning in the sky to look around. There were no towering story libraries reaching into the clouds, no intricate, unique jungles. What appeared in its sight was a vast, boundless expanse of water, displaying a strange, grayish-white, lifeless hue. On the water's surface floated countless animal corpses and broken trees. It emitted a special odor of decay, different from fresh water. That was the smell of salt. The downpour stopped, and a seam opened in the thick clouds. A wisp of pale moonlight fell upon this unfamiliar body of water. My strategist sensed that the bottom of the water was no longer fertile humus, but rough, crystallized saline alkali land. Had they been washed out of the inland to an estuary delta? My mind briefly processed this. For fungi accustomed to freshwater and forest ecosystems, and terrestrial dinosaurs, a high salinity environment was nothing short of slow poisoning. The water in my body was silently draining away due to changes in osmotic pressure. Before I could come up with a countermeasure, on the grayish-white water surface not far ahead, a series of dense, glowing green bubbles suddenly floated out, glowing with an eerie green light. Beneath the bottomless saltwater, something even stranger than the giant crocodile, something massive, was silently awakening. This escape seemed to have led them into an even deadlier Asura field. High-concentration saltwater was a natural grave for fungi. In the surrounding grayish-white saltwater, the free sodium ions and chloride ions, like countless microscopic chisels, were frantically cutting through the main body's cell walls. Get out of the water! I endured the agony of my spirit being torn apart, and issued a desperate command to the little triceratops below. The 3-ton herbivorous beast was in a worse state than me at this moment. Hearing my command, the little triceratops, relying on its last shred of survival instinct, its 4 limbs frantically scrabbled on the rough saline alkali reefs underwater. Its massive body, like a rusty bulldozer, forcibly pushed itself out of the water and collapsed onto a grayish-white rock beach exposed above the water. A keel clung tightly to the gaps in the triceratops' neck. The giant beetle's spiracles were tightly closed, entering a dormant state of armor death spot to resist the high salinity environment, and the well-blind sac growing on the triceratops' broken horn had completely shrunk into a shriveled, dark red, hardcore land combat squad. On this deathly coastal strip, where land and sea met, it was completely paralyzed. I had no time to check on my subordinates' injuries. All my computing power was focused on the eerie green glowing water ahead. Beneath the murky surface, those dense green bubbles were rising with an extremely regular rhythm, bursting. Accompanying the bursting of the bubbles, a strong smell of hydrogen sulfide permeated the. Something was about to emerge. The grayish-white rock surface was forcibly split open from the middle by a powerful undercurrent, heading directly towards the rock beach where the triceratops lay. Water exploded. A terrifying head, larger than the entire body of the little triceratops, unexpectedly emerged from the water. It was a Leopleurodon, nearly 10 meters long. This prehistoric plesiosaur, which should have dominated the deep sea, a sub-apex predator, perhaps due to chasing fish schools, or perhaps swept in by the storm, had unexpectedly become stranded in this shallow, marshy estuary, the incredibly vicious deep-sea overlord. Locked onto the little Triceratops sprawled on the shore. The Leopleurodon had no intention of coming ashore. It opened its gaping maw and thrust its massive head forward, its target for biting being the exposed rear half of the little Triceratops' body near the water. There was no escape. The alarm in my brain screamed to its maximum. The little Triceratops' muscles were completely incapacitated by dehydration and exhaustion, lacking even the strength to move an inch. Akiao, the prehistoric giant beetle in hibernation, was forcibly awakened by my neural electric shock. Under my control, Akiao, like a black cannonball out of the barrel, shot up from the Triceratops' neck and directly slammed into the Leopleurodon's wide-open upper jaw. A colossal crash. Akiao's carapace, strengthened countless times, slammed hard into one of the Leopleurodon's fangs. Half of the fang broke off, but the Leopleurodon's enormous biting force did not cease, and it became even more frenzied due to the pain. Akiao was directly sent flying by this overwhelming force, crashing heavily into the saltwater dozens of meters away. Its fate unknown, the Leopleurodon serrated teeth fiercely, clamped onto the little Triceratops' right hind leg. The little Triceratops let out a desperate shriek. Its 3-ton body, like a rag doll, was forcibly dragged by that terrifying force towards the deep water. Saltwater instantly poured in, submerging my main body once again. Physical attacks were ineffective. Toxins would be instantly diluted underwater. Akiao, in its dormant state, couldn't fire at all. Most deadly of all, my own cells were collapsing in this high-concentration saltwater. All things have their natural counterparts, their strengths and weaknesses. There is no absolute dead end. I forced myself to ignore the agonizing pain of my umbrella cap tearing apart. My gaze penetrated the murky saltwater and fixed on the glowing objects, constantly emitting green bubbles beneath the Leopleurodon's lower jaw area. Those glowing objects constantly emitting green bubbles. Those were not aquatic plants, nor ordinary algae. They were the oldest, most tenacious life forms in the ancient ocean, variant communities of halophilic cyanobacteria. They could not only thrive in this high salinity environment, capable of killing all freshwater organisms, but also reproduce. They could even convert surrounding sulfides into energy, since the saltwater was trying to drain me dry. Then I would become a being that could breathe in saltwater. A tactic, crazy to the extreme, took shape in my mind. I decisively severed all neural links with the little Triceratops. During the Triceratops' descent, as it was dragged into the deep water, my entire stipe violently contracted, compressing the last bit of accumulated high-grade carbon-based energy, all into the tip of my umbrella cap. Detachment and ejection. I abandoned 80% of my fungal body, retaining only the core ganglion, and the most concentrated spore cluster, a lump the size of a fingernail, a dumpling-like flesh mass, emitting a faint blue glow, under the cover of the water current, precisely attached itself to the point where the plesiosaur entered the river, on that largest melancholic green cyanobacteria colony. The war of conquest in the microscopic world erupted on the jaw of the deep-sea predator. The moment my spores touched those green filaments, they immediately met with a furious counterattack from the ancient bacteria. But what I brought out was a plesiosaur progenitor beast that had absorbed the raptor's composite high-grade mutated spores. Decoding began. I did not choose a violent engulfment, but adopted the most advanced biochemical hacking tactic. Genetic bridging. The spore cluster transformed into countless undetectable nanometer-scale probes, directly piercing into the cell nuclei of the outermost cyanobacteria. Read, replicate, manipulate. My mind, comparable to a supercomputer, analyzed the halophile archaea's cell wall structure in 0.1 seconds. It found the core gene sequence that resisted osmotic pressure, a special protein channel capable of firmly locking water molecules inside the cell and expelling excess salt out of the body. I forcibly branded this gene sequence into the core of my spores. The originally faint blue spore mass began to tremble violently under the washing of the seawater. The blue light gradually mutated, taking on a layer of strange, melancholic green belonging to the deep sea. Blue and green intertwined, finally transforming into a captivating deep cyan. Purification complete. The halophilic symbiote no longer feared the erosion of seawater. The surrounding high concentration of salt instead became an excellent electrolyte missile. My fungal reach spread explosively in the seawater. I no longer needed to slowly grow mycelia. In these waters filled with cyanobacteria, every lump of green mucus, every glowing spore, became a natural signal amplifier. Now, the tide has turned. I sent the newly generated deep cyan mycelia along the plesiosaur's rough scales and crevices, plunging fiercely into its thick epidermis. The golden threads were like nimble, oily tongues, rapidly spreading across the plesiosaur's skin surface, precisely locating the tiny nerve pores, distributed around its snout, used to sense water current vibrations. This is the most sensitive and most undefended part of all aquatic reptiles. Neuroparalytic toxin was fully synthesized, forming a brilliant column, using the cyanobacteria network as an infusion tube. The plesiosaur replacement toxin, synthesized by itself, was mixed with the sulfides extracted earlier, transforming into a stream of deep cyan venom. Following the plesiosaur's nerve pores, it rushed unimpeded straight to its cerebral cortex. The plesiosaur, which was fiercely biting the baby Triceratops underwater. Its enormous body suddenly froze. In its murky eyeballs, a flicker of unnatural terror and bewilderment flashed. It could not feel the existence of its lower jaw. Immediately after, a strange hallucination completely destroyed its sanity. In its vision, the tiny glowing cyanobacteria around it suddenly magnified into countless creatures with bloody gaping mouths. Frantically gnawing at its body, the plesiosaur let out a muffled roar underwater. Its huge flippers no longer paddled water, but like a mad creature, it wildly thrashed its head, trying to drive away enemies that didn't exist. The baby Triceratops seized this opportunity, dragging its bitten-off hind leg, desperately dog-paddling towards the shallow water zone to escape. But this was not enough. The destructive power of this enormous creature underwater was too terrifying. Its thrashing churned up deadly whirlpools. If it wasn't completely controlled, the entire ecosystem of the shallow beach would be destroyed. Deep into the core, my deep cyan mycelia, following the nerve pathways damaged by the toxin, implanted themselves deep within. Bypassing the plesiosaur's thick skull, they directly enveloped its pitifully small head. Compared to its body size, forced takeover, the enormous plesiosaur suddenly stopped thrashing, silently suspended in the grayish-white saltwater. Its murky eyes lost focus, replaced by a profound, cold, cyan glow, slowly swirling in the depths of its pupils. Host neural link established. Naval combat vehicle. Plesiosaur biointegration successful. I manipulated the plesiosaur to slowly surface. The enormous beast docilely stopped beside the shallow beach where the baby Triceratops was. The baby Triceratops trembled with fear, dragging its broken leg, repeatedly backed away. And on the other side, a Kaio, covered in mud and sand, also crawled out of the water. Although the giant beetle's 6 legs were somewhat damaged, it still fiercely opened, its large mandibles blocking the Triceratops. I didn't pay attention to them. Their current state was very strange. My main body was no longer a specific mushroom, but had transformed into a cyan mycelial mat, covering the plesiosaur's snout and the shallow beach on the water surface. To sustain the life of the baby Triceratops, I branched off some mycelia and crawled onto the shallow beach, reconnecting with the baby Triceratops' nervous system to stop its bleeding and block its pain. And the storm had completely ceased. Pale moonlight illuminated this strange, still water. I decided to utilize the plesiosaur's mobility to explore the bottom of these saline waters. The plesiosaur swayed its enormous flippers, silently dived into the deep water. As the diving depth increased, light was gradually swallowed. I borrowed the plesiosaur's night vision and my own microelectromagnetic wave perception to outline the underwater topography. This was not an ordinary river estuary delta. At a depth of approximately 50 meters from the surface, the saline alkaline mud and sand layer suddenly broke, revealing a bottomless abyssal trench. A strong smell of sulfur emerged from the depths of the trench. That was the seabed, a sign of hydrothermal vent activity. I controlled the plesiosaur to hover at the edge of the trench. On the cliff walls of the trench were densely attached numerous ancient, gigantic marine organisms containing huge amounts of calcium and phosphates. This was simply a natural biochemical arsenal. My mycelia trembled slightly with excitement, just as I was about to let the plesiosaur swim down for a great feast. Suddenly, an extremely strong sense of crisis pierced my nervous system like a steel needle. This was not the instinctive fear when facing a predator, but a kind of exclusive territorial warning among peers. I abruptly concentrated my perception, staring intently at the deepest part of the trench bottom. That patch of darkness, there was no faint green fluorescence of cyanobacteria. On the contrary, in the depths of those mountainous piles of huge ancient sea bones, deep within, a faintly unsettling crimson glow emanated. A wave of extremely low-frequency vibrations came from underwater. This was not a sound made by animals. This was a pure bioelectrical signal, magnetic field resonance caused by large-scale scanning of the waters. In my microscopic world, which surpassed common understanding, I saw a hair-raising sight. The skeletons at the bottom of the trench were not dead objects drifting with the current at all. Their bone crevices were filled with a kind of eerie, blood-red fungus. Those red mycelia were thicker than mine and more aggressive. They were like blood vessels, connecting the remains of every prehistoric behemoth, weaving the entire trench bottom into a huge, pulsating red network. The most terrifying thing was that, when my detection electromagnetic waves touched that red network, the other party instantly responded with a warning. Unregistered probe detected. Minor anomaly. Alien ecology. 100% conflict rate. Initiating purge protocol. This cold, mechanical feedback, with a clear social division of labor logic, could absolutely not belong to any kind of naturally evolved Jurassic plant or fungus. In that red fungal network, several enormous plesiosaur skeletons, in their empty eye sockets, scarlet light suddenly ignited. These several skeletons, dead for tens of thousands of years, were actually under the manipulation of the red fungus, slowly rising from the trench bottom, raising their 3-meter-long bony cervical vertebrae. locked onto the sliding gear, hovering at the upper edge. I'm not the only player in this era. My thoughts, cooled to the extreme in the icy seawater. My past life science fiction memories, reunited with cruel reality at this moment. This is a kind of music more deadly than dinosaurs. This is a single-minded bun on another evolutionary path.